Alright, so now we're down to our last video, and this will probably be the most lighting video there is in this whole tutorial because we are just going to be troubleshooting and going over solutions that I found and things I ran into. I had to go back into lighting, maybe things I could just adjust in Nuke. So I'm just going to go over everything I kind of went through to get to where I'm at now. So I'm just going to show you real quick. This is where we left off, and this is where I am at the moment. So quite a big difference. A lot of things have changed, but I needed to do a lot of stuff back in Maya. We went through the workflow. It was good. You guys saw just how we built all these components separately and were able to rebuild it back together. But obviously, when we were doing that, there were some hiccups here and there. So one of the big ones I ran into was just really, and it goes to show how much you should emphasize in testing and making sure your cameras are nice and locked before going through this whole process. If your things are just not aligning, you will run into these issues later on. So if I kind of would have spent a little bit longer on the top renders, we could have seen that we could have solved a lot of these things. So I'm just going to go back all the way to our top renders, which I have all the way over here. And actually, we're going to run through and see all the stuff we ran into and just where we are now. So if you remember way back when we rendered this out and we were getting these wireframe issues. And also what I noticed is as I was sending these things to the farm, they were not coming back correctly. Like the light values were not correct. For instance, we had these pretty much hot and blowing out, and we were missing some parts here, and I found that I didn't really notice it right away until I kind of went back to my old local renders, and I was like, whoa, what's going on? So ended up my solution for that was something was breaking between me sending it to the farm. Some of the mesh lights weren't working. And just odd stuff like that. So I just rendered it locally, and it actually ended up working just fine. That might have to be, I'm not really sure. I was kind of trying to figure out why it was not working. But it was just very odd. It was just a regular area light. Okay, so in here, then we said we went to those settings, we adjusted, so that kind of removed it and actually solved some other areas. And then here is where now I went back locally and just kind of rendered it, and now the mesh light came back, and then these intensities came back, which I get the feeling there was something going on with a light that was just disconnecting when we were sending it to the farm. Could have been one of the it could have been just the dome light or something. So it's interesting that it was just that light that was just not coming through. Which looks like we lost our line as well. Alright, so anyways, so I went back into Maya and just kind of adjusted because we said we were not getting the right placement when we were bringing in our other renders around here. So I moved it around and just kind of was trying to eliminate this area and just kind of flatten it out, and also bring some of this curve a little bit into the forefront. So if I go before, after, you notice we can see a little bit more of that hump, and also we're kind of shrinking this area here, and we're shrinking these areas down here, so we're not seeing these bottom bits, and we can just place our chrome pieces right under there, things like this. And once I did this adjustment, I made sure the big one was, okay, are we losing too much on this guy, because we need this perspective and this shape, and we weren't losing a lot. So I kind of kept kind of going through the image, and I started noticing a lot of stuff was getting solved with this big camera move I did. For instance, the big one was our chrome was actually not looking half bad. So this was our previous render, and then this is the new one. So before, after, before, after. So that camera move actually solved a lot of things that I assumed was an ortho camera. So that actually placed these in a much more straight on position, and I actually didn't need the orthographic camera for this. I just figured, you know what, it's working, so let's just keep it in that top camera. Then we know 100% sure that this is gonna align because it's the same camera. And more importantly is I'm actually not upset that we worked on this in a separate render layer, because now if we need to adjust just the chrome, we can go back into just render layer and just adjust what we need and not have to re-render this whole body all over again. So we have it separate, we have the same cameras, and of course we needed to update our mats because our mats were rendered with that previous camera as well. So I just updated the mats as well, just so you guys can see the crypto mat after. So and I brought in those guys now because since now we're using it in the same camera, now we can just kind of have them in the same crypto mat. So I ran all of this the same, it's all good. I updated this as well, so everything's in the same camera. The decals, haven't touched them, but we know that works. And then moving down here, so like before, like I was saying, we were losing the mesh light, and I get the feeling that's what we were losing when we were sending it to the farm. At least for this render, we were losing the mesh light, and we were losing all that hot value that we wanted. So I did just a local render, and that seemed to have fixed. This seems to be just the way that the reflection's falling. I thought it was geo before, but the geo is this alpha. So this actually is just a reflection. And another thing I was getting a lot of these noises and artifacts, which I actually don't even have it here, but you can sort of see it. Some of these were also all over this area. What I found was I just make sure in my area light, I just removed effect diffuse, and that seemed to resolve any of that speckle and artifacts we were getting. And now that we have the correct values, I split this into its components: the diffuse, reflection, refract, specular. Brought it all in together with a plus, and then rebuilt it. And now here I just made sure I grabbed the alpha from the original and just pushed it at the end. So what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the alpha from here and I'm bringing it over with a copy all the way at the end. So I replaced the alpha because actually at the moment we don't have any. Yeah, so these shuffles are don't have any alphas, so when I'm plussing them in, there's still no alpha, so it needs one, so I just replaced it here. So we go before and after. And also now that we're here, when we were talking about probably adjusting these reflections, that maybe that's not what we want. Well, now that we have it separate in its own little comp, we can just use a grade node. And I usually stick to gain in terms of just kind of balancing this. And and then you can just adjust where you need to. So maybe obviously it's too strong at 1, so I'm just going to bring it down, just so we can see some of that value change from light to dark to light again. Cool. All right, so that we have this set up is ready to go. Again, the Chrome section, like I said, we are now using that top camera. And then here I just built a custom mat. What I'm doing is using this custom mat that we did before, using an expression to just make this whole thing as one alpha. I don't think, oh, sorry. Actually, don't think we're actually using, this actually might be old. Actually, I'm gonna move this out of the way. Yeah, we didn't need this anymore. This was while we were still doing that other stuff. So what I'm doing is I'm just grabbing that top mat, which this same render is exactly this. I just brought it down here just so I can visually see what I'm doing. And I use the crypto mat just to select all the stuff I needed. So if I turn off mat only, you can see the original crypto mat render element. And I just, using control, clicked on all the geos that I wanted to make into an alpha. So just back to mat only. And we actually don't need this. So now that we have this as an alpha, what I'm doing is I want to change the alpha of this guy, because right now this is the alpha. So I'm going to replace it with this new one that we did, again using our copy nodes. We actually don't need this to be red, we can just say alpha. This is all residue from the other stuff I was testing. So now if we go here, you can see now that's our new alpha, and then we're bringing it using the mat function. Now you can go on the Foundry's website to find all the functions and what each one of them does. So what the mat is doing, it's going to everything that's in 0 outside of the alpha gets removed. So it's almost like doing a pre-molt. What it's doing, it's multiplying the image RGB with alpha. So I'm hit 1, 2, and what it's doing, it's removing everything that's outside the alpha because it's multiplying it with 0. So now you have this clean render that you can just kind of do an over, but if you want to just skip this step, you can just use a mat and it's the same thing. Otherwise, if we can do it is, if you want to go the long way, so before, after, and again before, after. So it's the same thing. So I'm just gonna keep it with the mat function just to keep it clean, because you start creating all these nodes and it starts getting messy. All right, so now we got this guy over here and this guy over here, and now we run into this issue where we have, well, the old one is still back there. So here is as I'm going down the stream, I made an expression which I said I want this upper area, which is the render we had before that I plugged in here. I'm just going to go back, is this guy. So I'm accessing this guy all the way down here using an expression node. I'm saying mat underscore Breville upper area dot red. I'm going to add that with our Steam one, and I'm going to make this alpha, and I'm going to bring in this alpha that we have already working up here, which is this guy, and I'm just going to add both of them together. So again, just so you see, I'm adding this with this guy, creates this guy, which is our new one, and we're going to replace this alpha, which is right now solid, with that one. Reason why is because we want to isolate this whole top area and ignore everything back here, so we're not bothered with that. And then this was when we were when we had that this Steam one was out here. So what I actually did was I shuffled it out and I actually used the translate to bring it over, but that got really messy. So now that we're rendering it all together and it's connected, we don't have to worry about that. So again, just keep going. Just gonna remove this as I go along. And now we're down here. We'll do the pre-molt that I showed you earlier. What I'm doing is, again, anything that's outside of the alpha, it's going to be multiplied by 0, which is going to remove it. So now we have this guy as our new element that we're going to just plop right over our bottom render. But before we go, let us go through some other stuff I ran into when rendering the bottom. So the bottom body by default, when I rendered it out, this reflection is affecting the specular, which is this gradient that we have in the back. So if I go into our reflection here, so this is good because we want this so we can adjust it, but this was also affecting the specular. It was removing it in order for it to just be plopped right over. So if I go, this is our lighting. Why is this name specular? This should be our lighting. That is incorrect. This is our lighting pass. I'm using a shuffle to push out the lighting. This is the reflection, refraction, specular. And if you add them all together, I'm just gonna hide this part here. Plus, plus, plus. Right? But I wanted to be able to adjust the reflection here as its own. The problem is if I just kind of kept it as is and suddenly I'm just removing this this reflection, I'm just revealing nothing. There's nothing back there from the specular. So what I ended up doing is, well, I wanted this as its own element now. And I went back into Maya and rendered just that piece out on its own with the same lighting. So just so you can see the render before. Now, one important thing I want to go over, this is why those V-Ray object properties were very powerful, because you can do quite a lot of things with it. So if I just jump back into Maya real quick, this is that bottom panel render. What I ended up doing is I just hid everything else but this, and I left this guy on as well because I wanted to make sure anything that's everything that's in front of it gets like occluded, so we don't have to like use any rotos or whatever. Turns out this was actually pretty right along the edge, so I didn't have to do anything, but I still wanted some of that reflection going on to it. So if I go in here, you can see it in the render. We're still getting some of that reflection. But more importantly is I'm not getting an alpha from this guy. I'm just getting a clean alpha of just this piece of geo. Now the way to do that is using our V-Ray object properties. If you remember, we have our this right panel geo lives under the top section V-Ray object property, and this guy, which is a custom piece I made, which, you know, let me actually switch back so I can show you. This piece was actually all together. It's called outer piece 02. So what I ended up doing is I duplicated this piece of geo and just removed this bottom section because I just wanted a clean reflection onto here. So if I go up here, you see, now I have this guy by itself. Right, so under this V-Ray object property, if you go under the attributes here, what I ended up doing is I made a layer override using right-click layer override. So if I just create layer override, all I'm doing is right-clicking and then hitting the check so it only affects this render layer. So now that makes it a matte surface, so you won't see it like this red. It just kind of turns it off, which at the end I'm like, I don't know if I needed to do that, but the big important part was this guy, the alpha contribution. Same thing, right click, I made the layer override and just put it to -1. This ensures that this doesn't render with an alpha over it. So otherwise you would have seen this solid and then this solid in the alpha, and we don't want that. We just need this piece here. And the beauty is, and now that it's its own here, you can always adjust if you need to separately. But anyways, now that I had that, I can go in here and just using again the matte function, because this alpha here, so we can remove everything that's outside of it. Now it does affect this area, but I'm not really too mad at it. That looks pretty good. So that replaces that. Now we have a nice clean specular pass, and now if we build this guy, we are able to do a lot of things. We can either grade it here, grade this reflection if we don't want it that strong. And now obviously we're affecting this bottom guy, so we could do things like this. We can be like, well, we just want to affect this guy on top. So let's just do a quick roto. Just gonna garbage mat it real quick, because we just wanted to affect this top area. And we're just gonna use that as a mask. So pulling out this tab creates a mask. Like a little mask selector here. So now if I go in here, go here, Ah, there we go. I was looking at the wrong channel. Yep. So now I can just adjust this guy if I want just a little bit. And now I'm viewing down here. Oh. So you see, you can always adjust that as you need it. Or if you want to reveal a little bit more, it's not so washed, we can actually go into this matte and just bring it down, because what it's doing is it's bringing back some of this dark space, as opposed to this, where it's just a clean cut. So now we are able to control that using this mix. So now you have those options. You have all this full control on how much you want of the original reflection onto this. So pretty powerful, and you can just quickly adjust, and depending what the client wants, and you can, even if you want, you're like, you know what, I want to remove even more of this, you can adjust using more rotos. I want it to be darker or lighter on top. You could even do something like this, a little bit of another quick roto, and just something like this, and just what I'm doing is holding control here and just doing like I'm pulling these guys to make like a fall off like this. So that's this roto here, and again using that as a mask. I can say, oh, I want that to be much darker up there. So before, after, and just before, after. So quite a lot of things you can do with this. But yeah, so I just wanted to show you guys what kind of stuff I ran into with this bottom section. Now what is this doing? Let me disconnect that, because all we need now is just to bring this guy over. Well, with the same thing as we ran into before, we need to make sure we have the correct alpha when we're bringing this over. So we might not actually need it. Let's be on. So the reason why I have this roto now that I remember is that just like the this top area, we need to remove some other areas. We actually don't need any of this up here. So that's what that thing was. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just do an invert on this. Cool. And you can do just stencil, or we can just do a that's why. Sorry, I was confused here. All right, there we go. So okay, so I have this roto to just remove this top section. I'm using a min here, so boom. Interesting that it's doing that to this. This must be because of that guy. Alright, so sorry about that. That was kind of confusing. I had a bunch of stuff I had done before and I forgot. Actually, so I'm just going to remove this. So it's just a roto here that I blocked out. And so I'm just going to use a stencil to remove it. So now we have this. Just make sure because I don't want this to be affected. Cool. All I wanted was that. And now we can just plot this upper area right over here. And there you have it, before, after. Nice. All right, so now, okay, we got the bottom working. We have it all separate, and we can adjust, like we said, on our own. pretty cool. Now the grinder was a whole other a thing in itself, is that because I changed the camera, we were now seeing this top area. We were not seeing that before, and that needed its own lighting treatment and separate render altogether. So that was a whole other mission onto itself, where V-Ray object properties really did help me out. Now, this is the grinder renders we started out with for, so this one was, right, so this is the one we had before. This is with the new camera, so you can see how it's tilted. We see a little bit more up here. This thing narrows down a bit. This guy gets pushed up. But the problem became is if I were to just do something like this. Oh, right. If I were to do something like this, you know, it's not working really that well, because now this thing is just kind of floating behind it. So what I ended up doing is, okay, I figured we need to make sure we have that geo so we can actually see how it's being treated right under it. So I rendered this out, which is that geo, but again, using our V-Ray object properties, I made sure that geo had that alpha contribution set to -1. So let's take a look at that render. So this is the top grinder beauty. Okay. So I brought this geo in, and it lives in this top section object property. So again, make sure that the alpha contribution was set to -1. This allowed it to affect the alpha and leave us with this sort of kind of soft alpha that, you know, it will have like the red panel in the back, and then this kind of just layers over it, and it looks like it's being hidden like behind the glass. And of course we needed that panel. We needed this guy in its own beauty now, because it needs its own lighting treatment. Now I could have thrown it with the this top section here, but I figured, you know, we're already down this far in the rabbit hole, let's just kind of keep this separate. So this is the beauty that comes out. I just set up 2 lights, just kind of giving us this gradient to give us a shape, and also sort of respecting sort of how this guy is coming down, so it just doesn't look disconnected. So yeah, that's the alpha for this guy. And because this alpha is already being cut here, this just kind of layers right over it. So it just looks like it's naturally behind. And again, so if we go here, I didn't really care too much about all this because it was going to get blocked anyway. So if I kind of go here to this grinder, it's going to make a quick dot. Oh. So we got this guy working. So this part here is going to be tricky. It's interesting. Now I need to make sure I remove this guy first so we can see the guy behind it. So let's do that now. Glad we ran into it so we can see what we could do. You know what? I'm just going to, this might be a little bit messy, but I'm just going to create a quick roto. And I'm going to use a rectangle. What I'm going to do is going to grab these guys and just bring them down. Maybe not that far because it's going to start going in to this curve, and that's not what I want. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to remove that part. Okay. It's interesting. I do not want this. I don't want this rotor to add more alpha here. If anything, I want to do the opposite. So let's see what we can do here. Ooh. Let's see, I keep jumping between. Okay. Actually, this is good because I want to see how far did we go down here. I don't really need it to be affecting that far down. Okay. This should not be set to multiply. Okay. So now I can actually see what's happening. We could always keep adjusting this guy to remove as much as we can. It's a little bit ghetto. I should have done this a little bit cleaner, which what I should have done is made a mat for it, maybe just selected the faces of that geo up here and assign a surface shader in order to like isolate this geo, because I know it's attached to this front panel here. So this is all together in one geo, so we'd have to make a custom one. So just to kind of keep this thing moving, I'm just going to do that really quick. Use a stencil to remove it, and then blop. So, you know, a little bit of maneuvering we had to do, and obviously it's a little bit messy. We need to clean this out because we're getting some of that leftover stuff. We can always add more points and just adjust as we need to. And I'm hitting Q to like hide any overlay things. Cool. All right, so let's move forward, and then down here what we have, oh, this is the shadow treatment. So yeah, I had to go back and do some shadow passes as well. I just did something really rough, which I ended up using the ambient occlusion V-Ray dirt as an extra text. So if we jump over here and we have this shadow pass, I made two big lights to sort of mimic from the reference sort of this directionality we have, kind of going inwards. And I make sure on the render elements I had shadow turned on, and I just threw in raw shadow too. Sometimes I get something interesting and good there. But this V-Ray AO was a custom one I made using this extra text here, extra text render element. The way you use that is I'm just hit add really quick so show you how I build it. First things first, I'm just gonna hit just put this naming here, and I always make sure to put it all over this just so it's all consistent. Now under the texture tab here, you could just go here. Here's the first one here, V-Ray dirt, and so what that does is it makes it, well, it assigns that texture to everything in the in this render layer, and it renders it out. So if we switch over to this shadow pass here, and I just I think I pushed it out in here. So if I go for this, is how it's rendering. So it's assigning that V-Ray dirt texture onto everything. So it's assigning it to that to this guy. Now the reason that's not rendering, it's because I went into these V-Ray object properties and make sure primary visibility is layer overrided for this render layer. So it's primary vis. So in order for it not to render, but we want it obviously to affect this. So this is the ambient occlusion, and then if we jump over here, this is the shadow, and that's how it's coming out. And we can just kind of do some things here. So here I just graded it a little bit. Here I inverted it, did a little bit of grading, and then just brought them all together using a multiply. So, and then this is our background, which is a solid white. And then what I used the roto is I used it just to mask out this area because we didn't need any of this. So then it just kind of brings this whole bottom section, and that becomes our background, and we do an A over B here. Oh, well, that did not go as planned. And that has to do with this guy. This is the alpha that's coming through, and this has to do with the bottom section. So if I go in here, this is not correct. This should be all solid. So to remedy that, we can do what we did before, was just grab this alpha from up here. We should probably do it before this guy. All right, so before we get all messed up, let's just bring this guy over here. This is going to be the adjustment to remove everything extra, and I'm just going to put it in between them. So this is the alpha, and then this guy cuts it all apart. Got it all together. This is our alpha. Now, before, after. And there you have it. There is your renders all built up together. Everything's all separated. We have full control, and probably way too much in some areas. But now you're able to adjust everything as you need. We have everything set up in mats. If you need to adjust a certain area, for instance, hey, you know what, this anisotrophic is probably way too hot. We can work on it in our top section here. We can, after we plug in all our mats, of course, so you can access things. I would probably make this a little bit shorter here. Bring this down. So here I'm already doing two things. I'm calling on this wheel gear. So I adjusted this guy, and then I did a hue correct from earlier, and I'm using this upper body mask in order to isolate that area. And again, if we ever need to adjust anything else, we can just go into here and say, listen, I want to adjust maybe the buttons. I can just drop the gain really quick. There you go. And if you ever need to, so this is a little bit more of a longer process. If you ever need to adjust maybe a light, you can use the light selects we have now built in here. So if I go into our beauty, we can drop down here, and you see we have a light select for the anisotrophic lights. We have these guys. This is all the lights I had for the dial. So you can use these as masks as well if you need to adjust one of these guys. So let's go in here and see if we can access that guy. Maybe let's do dial 1. Now the reason I just did this up here was just because I know down here now I have to I have this massive list. So it doesn't matter as long as it's still in there. So yeah, you can do things like this, or maybe I want to, and I'm hitting red because it's going to split it into 3 different channels, but we only need, it's only a black and white image, so I'll just use red in some cases. Or if you really need to adjust something, maybe if we shuffle out this, so the problem here is that now this is affecting the whole, we're affecting more than when I thought. This is where we have diffuse in here, so that makes it a little bit more tricky. But things like this will probably work much better for if you want to adjust the top left light. You can always shuffle it out and use a grade and just pull out that little mask and just grab it into the shuffle, and then you can just adjust it as you need to. And hit D to disable if you need. Cool. All right. So I'm just gonna one last view at the end, and let's do a quick before and after. So this was our previous render. This is where we are now. A little bit more finalized, and again, this should have the correct alpha. Yep. And as you can see, it's actually affecting correctly the refraction, so we're seeing the background. So yeah, before, after, and let's take a look at our reference now. Definitely areas where we could improve on, but you know, I think we're definitely getting there. And we have a lot to play with now. But yeah, this is just want to show you guys just the whole workflow of, you know, even the troubleshooting areas that I run into and all the stuff we need to fix. But at this point, I would go in and just adjust where I need to, now that I have everything rebuilt and ready to go. Once I start hitting limitations, maybe on areas like maybe if the client maybe wants this super duper fine light kind of wrapping around this whole rim, you could either do it with a nice roto and adjust it, or at that point, that's where you start moving on to maybe start Photoshop can do more refinements with their tools. Usually when I do this stuff, this kind of work, I push it as much as I can into Nuke, and then there it gets pushed on to maybe Photoshop work and just super duper refinements at that point. But in terms of lighting, this is a product render ready to go. We would usually export this out and send it off to the different departments, whether they need it to render this in for the packaging. This will be a nice front-facing render they can use, or if you want to put this into your Amazon website to sell your product, this is a nice clean render you can use to showcase your product. But yeah, and then, you know, everything after this, it's either you change your cameras for a different angle, and, you know, same methods applied, you know, just make sure you're revealing and showing your product as best as you can, showing the material, showing the shapes, and just, you know, really making things pop as much as you can. But yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed the tutorial. This is sort of I think this is it, wraps up everything. Hope you guys picked up a few things here and there, and hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you at the next one. Peace.